Seth in the corner. Hi, everybody. I'm sick.
I'm glad you have protection because I don't want to get your lurgy.
I caught this off of a Skype call, so now everyone else is going to get it off of
You need
Link.
to update your antivirus, man.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, but it brought my voice down an octave.
It did. Very nice. Very
It
nice.
is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. And yeah, I got the cold that everyone else has got, so it sucks. How are you, Damien?
I'm well. I'm well. How are you?
Lovely. I understand that this is a big deal because you've prepared a deck.
I actually have a deck today. I know.
That is pretty amazing.
And the best part is I didn't prepare the deck. I just stole someone else's deck. This is actually the deck we use to present what we're going to talk about to the team on Friday, and now we're showing it to you, everyone who's watching now, on Tuesday. So
that is actually kind of a really cool representation of transparency. You are literally showing us the same deck you showed
the same deck with all the same cheesy animations and the same cheesy wording that it's not my fault, but I was said, hey, use the animation, please, Damien. I'm like, okay, like I don't think it's that dramatic, but I'll do my best to sell it. So
I hope that there is smart art.
I will
be disappointed if you show me anything less than smart art.
Okay, well let me just bring it up here, and
I'm going to lock it on you.
Tell me whether
click to add title. That is dramatic.
That is fantastic. Of course, I did actually say run. Is that working? No, it's totally.
Make sure you go to slideshow and turn off presenter mode.
Yeah, I did all that, but my problem is I'm trying to be clever and share a screen as an app rather than sharing a screen. Let me change that. I'm just going to share this screen instead. That one there. I'll say share. I'll come down here, hit that. How's that look? There we go.
I see a white page.
That's what you should see. Okay.
Dramatic.
So this is about naming. So if you remember a while back, we had a go at doing naming, and then we rolled it back again. We're a little premature. So we did another renaming exercise over the weekend. There's a bunch of code that's been changed. People may have seen it. And so without further ado, here's our new name in terms of some of the underlying bits. So there's a D and there's an N, and then there's a new letter on the end, which is an X. And I think there's some joke in here about it not being a 1990s rapper. So D and X, what does that refer to? Well, D and X refers to a bunch of different things. Wait for my slide to come up here. Okay. And it's all based around this term D and X. The term D and X is meant to reflect a few different things. Obviously, the DN represents .NET, so that should be fairly familiar to people. The X represents kind of nothing and everything at the same time, which is complete marketing mumbo-jumbo, but bear with me. It includes like the idea of execution. So what was the KRE, which was the K runtime environment, where K stood for nothing, is now DNX, which is like the execution environment, or the runner, or the host. And then we have X meaning cross-platform, because obviously one of the aspects of DNX that is so fantastic is that it can boot different CLRs, including on different platforms. And X is just kind of a cool letter, so that's nice. By creating a new short, somewhat unique name, we get a few benefits, which is kind of nice. It's somewhat easy to search for, so a lot of other terms that we looked at, if you type them into a search engine, you kind of got back a whole bunch, because they were fairly generic, you got back a whole bunch of results that weren't particularly specific to this new technology that we've built. And so by coming up with a new acronym that isn't particularly used elsewhere, certainly not in our industry, there's a better chance that when more material using this name gets out there in the web, you'll get more relevant search results, which is always a nice thing, just by typing in a very simple thing that's hopefully easy to remember. Also makes a good Twitter hashtag and Stack Overflow tag, those type of things. It's not something long you have to remember how to type out. It's just 3 letters. And it's easy to type at the command line. So we'll have a look in just a moment how this name translates into all the various components that make up everything we've talked about, as ASP.NET VNext, Project K, or ASP.NET 5. But typing DNX is actually really easy at the command line. I encourage people to try it. So what does that actually look like? So here we're going to look at all the different command line tools and how this adoption of this new short name reflects in all these tools. So the first one is the k.cmd and klr.exe. They will be merged into a new single thing, just called DNX. That's in process right now. And so that will be the main entry point of your app or your site. That's how it boots it. You can just run dnx.exe --help at the command line. That will show you a nice help screen. And there'll be a bunch of options on that you would have used previously with the K command or KLR directly, which you'll now just use DNX for. The KRE or the XRE is now just the DNX. So that's the .NET execution environment. That's a bunch of NuGet packages that are per architecture, so x64 or x86, per OS and per CLR type, .NET Framework, full CLR, core CLR, Mac, Linux, Windows, that contain that CLR, the bootstrappers necessary to boot that CLR, and any required execution components to get your app running. So there are multiple DNXs, if you will, and which one you are running currently will depend on what OS you're on, what bitness you want to run on, what framework you're targeting, and those type of things.
So for those people who might be listening and think that, well, wait a second, isn't a CLR a kind of a .NET execution environment? The execution environment's outside the CLR, right?
Yes. Someone has to
farther upstream.
Correct. So yes, it is the CLR is a common language runtime, but it is actually not an environment in and of its own. It needs to be booted by somebody else, and then someone else has to sit there and host the CLR. Like the CLR has its own API. You can new up an entire CLR and say run, and you give it a bunch of parameters in order to determine how it behaves. So the DNX is the thing that does that.
So in the past in .NET, if you've got .NET 2 and you've got .NET 4 on your machine, it's kind of like baked into Windows magically, and when you have a foo.exe, Windows and the Windows loader knows that this is a .NET thing, and it's the thing that injects MS Core lib and all that stuff into the memory space.
Yeah, so if you had built a command line .NET app before, you're absolutely right. Windows, there was basically a special header in that exe, and Windows knew that it had to boot that as a managed app. And if you wrote a web application, that logic was in the component called Web Engine 4, which ships with IIS, which ships with Windows. And so, yeah, Windows was the thing that knew how to boot .NET apps and host the CLR for you, whether it was the executable loader or whether it was Web Engine 4. In this whole new world, because we're cross-platform, that can't be an OS component anymore. And so DNX is now that component that does that work across platforms and knows how to boot things other than just the full CLR. It boots the core CLR, it can boot mono, and any other variant of a CLR as long as it conforms to the contract. So then we have the command line that lets you manage what DNXs you have on your machine. So this was previously KVM, or the K version manager. That's now DNVM, or the .NET version manager. And you just go to the command line, type DNVM. You can do DNVM space list, and that gives you a list of all the DNXs you have installed right now, or you can say DNVM space upgrade, and that will upgrade your current default. You can say space use to switch to a different DNX, etc., etc. All the commands you could do with KVM, you'll be able to do now with DNVM. And then KPM, which was the package manager before, which you had to obviously run KPM restore to get your packages before you could actually run K to run your app, that just becomes NuGet. So we're effectively merging the existing NuGet with our ASP.NET 5 sort of DNX NuGet, and so at the command line that will just be NuGet. That name hasn't changed yet. If you go and use today's bits, that still is KPM, but that change will happen over the following weeks.
Now this stuff is all happening kind of in the quote-unquote dailies, right? And that's right. Different. That's different from, very different from CTP6. So for those of us that are running the kind of the quote-unquote public bits, where I just installed Visual Studio, we're not going to see any of these things, right?
Right. So I'll take a moment to sort of discuss how this will impact people who have been using daily bits. So as you said, if you're using CTP6 of Visual Studio, none of this will affect you. If you've never installed KVM, if you've never downloaded a different KRE/XRE, you've never gone to the command line and typed KPM restore or anything like that, none of this will affect you. You're still locked to the bits that were shipped in Visual Studio. If, however, you had grabbed nightly bits off of our myget feed, so you'd use the ASP.NET vNext feed on myget, and you would install KVM manually from the ASP.NET/home repo on GitHub, then what's going to effectively happen is you'll be frozen in time from this point forward unless you update to the new tools, but doing so will break your Visual Studio. Okay, so Visual Studio, the bits that you have in CTP6 are obviously coded to use the old names and the old tools. They don't understand the new names. And there's another slide here I'll talk about in a minute where it goes beyond just the command line. This also affects other things. And so if you are using daily stuff, you can grab the new DNVM from the home repo. If you go to the dev branch, you can get that up and running, and you can certainly get the new DNX on your machine, but you won't be able to use it in Visual Studio. You'll be able to do everything from the command line, or if you're using Sublime and OmniSharp and those things, they'll be able to get themselves updated. But until we release new public Visual Studio bits, you won't be able to use Visual Studio with these new daily bits until we get a new release out there. So beyond the command line, what else does this affect? So if we look inside the user profile, there's a folder today, the .k folder, and it might be a different name on other people's machines. I think it was .kre at one point. That now becomes .dnx. So this is where all your packages get installed to. This is where the various DNXs themselves or the runtimes get installed to into a runtimes folder. And then we have a new folder called tools, which is where globally installed packages or tools go. So this is similar to npm's feature where you can globally install an npm package and then it creates a little command file or a batch file that lets you execute it as just a command line tool. We have a similar concept in this system, so you can use KPM or eventually NuGet to globally install any DNX application as a command line tool, and then that will show up in this tools folder, which is kind of cool. So then we have, inside the NuGet packages, we have folders under the lib folder, which are called TFMs, or Target Framework Monikers. They're basically different names that represent the different target frameworks for .NET. Previously, we had ASP.NET 50 and ASP.NET Core 50. That's changing to DNX 452, DNX 46, and DNX Core 50. It should be fairly obvious. They represent the different .NET frameworks that we run on. So DNX on top of .NET 452, DNX on top of .NET 4.6, which is the new version coming out this year, and DNX on top of .NET Core, which was the thing that we launched last year, which is the new view, .NET Core, CLR, all that goodness. Then we have a new name, which we didn't have an equivalent of before, which is Core 50. So we've talked about .NET Core over the last year and what that represents. But up until now, .NET Core didn't have a profile or a set of contracts that you could kind of point at and say, that is .NET Core. .NET Core was a bunch of things that other people could build on top of, like ASP.NET 5, but you couldn't build something that ran purely on .NET Core. Well, that's changing. So Core 50 is the name that represents the first version of the .NET Core profile, if you like. So if you're used to portable class libraries or PCLs, this is kind of the next PCL type thing. If you build an assembly that targets Core 50, that assembly can load inside ASP.NET 5 by DNX Core 50, or it will load in the .NET Framework in .NET Framework 4.6. So this is kind of the first version of this new .NET Core landscape where new .NET stacks will build themselves on top of .NET Core, and they will thus be sort of downwards compatible with this Core 50 profile. So if you build an assembly that targets Core 50, you can load it in .NET 4.6, you can load it in DNX on Core 50, perhaps .NET Native, or perhaps other stacks that exist or get invented in the future, assuming they're based on Core 50. What do we got next? Then we have just a folder name, DNX dash blah blah blah. That's sort of a full folder name for a specific DNX version. Obviously, it has to have the CLR, the OS, the bitness, and the version it supports. We have some environment variables which are being renamed that control various aspects of how these tools work. And then lastly, the project file was kproj up till now. That will change to xproj just to match the DNX name as well. In terms of project names and project template names, we have this really clunky project template right now, this ASP.NET 5 console app and ASP.NET 5 class library. They're going to go away. And what we'll have instead is, hopefully, this is still being determined, but this is as it is as of this morning. You'll have ASP.NET 5 application, which is all the various ASP.NET 5 project templates. You'll have a command line parentheses package, which is effectively a console app built on top of DNX that is deployed as a NuGet package. And the class library parentheses package, which again is a class library that is built into a NuGet package that can target any .NET framework. So this effectively, if you were trying to build portable class libraries today, or you're trying to build NuGet packages that run on multiple .NET stacks today, whether it's portable or .NET Framework or Mono or Windows Phone or Windows Store or Xamarin or any of those things, our new class library system or project system, this class library package, previously called ASP.NET 5 class library, is what we want you to be using. It's one project system that can build a NuGet package with multiple assemblies for any of those target stacks that you might be using. Now, the default TFM of those projects, currently we're planning on the default TFM being Core 50. So if you say file new class library package, by default it will build you a NuGet package with one assembly in it that targets that new Core 50 profile, meaning it can be loaded in any stack that supports Core 50. You can obviously add different target profiles in your project JSON, and there'll be a UI for that eventually as well. And then you can build a NuGet package with multiple assemblies, like I promised. But by default, we're talking about that targeting Core 50, where Core 50 is that new baseline for .NET moving forward. That's the end of my slideshow.
So let me ask you this.
Yes.
You talk very fast. Now I'm sick.
I did.
I'm sick, so there is that to be considered.
Okay.
Also extremely Australian. What about people who might be listening who are saying that this seems very confusing? How much in one's day-to-day will they have to think about this stuff and when they're just writing an application in ASP.NET?
I would say if you're the type of developer who pretty much spends all their time in Visual Studio just building applications, like you're not building libraries for consumption by other people, you just don't have to think about this at all. Now, obviously, in introducing everything we're working on here in Project K, ASP.NET 5, DNX, we're introducing new concepts. You know, the platform is more flexible. In going cross-platform and in supporting different CLRs, .NET Framework and Core CLR, we necessarily have to introduce some new facets, some new levels of complexity. So if you're interested in having your app run cross-platform, yeah, you're going to have to learn about one or two new concepts, because you can't take .NET Framework application that works on Windows and just have it run on a Mac or have it run on Linux. You have to understand that to get that portability, we had to introduce this new concept called .NET Core, and we had to introduce a new concept called DNX, because someone has to boot that CLR for you. Now, that said, if you just say file new project, web application, do it in VS and hit Control F5, that all still works. You can deploy to IIS, you can go through Web Deploy using the publish dialog, you can push it to Azure and or to your hosting provider onto your IIS server, and everything kind of works the way it did before. But if you're the type of developer who wants to understand what's going on, you want to peel off those layers and have a look at what's going on underneath the covers, I would argue that there really isn't any more complexity as to what there was previously. Like, if you're the type of developer who had looked at how the CLR was booted before, looked at what it meant to add stuff from the GAC versus loose assemblies and what the rules about those were, looked at how assemblies got loaded into the runtime based on the fusion probing paths and all those type of things, if you understand that type of stuff, if you've taken the time to learn that, you'll have no problem learning these new concepts as well, because they are just analogous. It's just that we have to support it on multiple platforms now as well.
Okay, so that doesn't seem like it is a reason to panic.
No, and I mean, obviously, I have a 4-slide deck that kind of shoves everything that results in, or is affected by this name change in a very short period of time. We don't expect people to learn all these concepts in 20 minutes. Like any new stack, it's there's progression involved. There'll be tutorials. I think we're trying to put together 500 pages of articles and documentation over the next year to really help people understand this new stack and build real applications and have them be portable onto alternate OSs, and all the complexities that adds. There will be things to learn, no doubt. But if you just do file new, write some code, deploy, that stuff will still work as well.
Okay, so for those who have been following ASP.NET 5 since it was called vNext in the past, there K, when you typed kweb or klist, kweb rather, that would be DNX.
Correct.
When you typed kvm list, that would be DNVM list.
Correct.
All right.
So previously we had 3 commands. I think we had K, we had kvm, and we had kpm.
Right. KPM was packaging things up.
Yeah, and restoring packages as well before you ran. And so now you'll have DNX to execute or DNX to host a design time host, because we're merging the KLR.exe, like the thing that K used to call. K was just a shell, like it just actually called KLR directly.
Right.
So that's just one thing now called DNX. That's what you use to execute. Then there'll be a DNVM to manage multiple versions on your machine. Now again, not everyone will need to do that. A lot of people will just get what comes with VS and use it, and that will be all they ever do. And then there'll be people who need to, and then obviously people doing package restoring from the command line or creating packages from the command line will use the NuGet command, just like they would have done today if they were doing that type of thing as well. So Fowler's just linking me right now, telling me I need to mention the format change. So no longer do you do DNX just test. So it used to be K-test. You now have to do DNX some path and then the command. So I believe if you're in the same folder as the app, you'll just be able to do DNX dot. So like, run DNX in the current folder and then the command. And I think, again, that's because we've merged the K command with the KLR exe. The exe needs to know what path it's operating on. So you can just say DNX dot test or DNX dot whatever, and that will run a command based on where you are currently.
Okay, so if I go file new console app the way I always did in the past, pick a regular old console app and called it foo, and I look in Task Manager, I'm going to see foo.exe. Right. But if I go and make a console app that's going to be working on Linux and it's going to run the .NET Core and it's going to be using ASP.NET type stuff, then it would be a DNX app. Meaning it would not be running using the standard loader. It would be running using the new loader. So I would see DNX.exe in the.
If you ran it from the command line or you're doing self-host, then it would be DNX.exe. If you're running it in IIS, it'll just be the IIS process like it always was. It'll be
like
IIS.exe or it'll be the W3P.exe. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That seems less panic-inducing than one would think.
Yeah, I mean, and like anything, I think there's always a period of learning the 3 or 4 new concepts and tools and playing around with it, seeing how things are surfaced in Visual Studio versus how they appear in the command line. Everything in our new project system in VS, as we've said before, is built directly on top of those command lines. Like we don't have sort of a layer of indirection where VS talks to a thing and the command line talks to a thing, and they kind of have to agree. So the VS talks directly to the same command line tools that you would use. So that they work cross-plat, and you kind of hopefully get a more unified experience. There was 2 other things I wanted to touch on in today's stand-up before we finish. One was we had a couple of people asking about SignalR version 3 and how that plays into ASP.NET 5. People may have noticed that in the last release of the ASP.NET 5 stuff for Beta 3, there wasn't a new drop of SignalR. The SignalR 3 server-side work has just paused at the moment. We've had to use basically we've had to use those developers to work on the core stuff for ASP.NET 5, and so we expect to come back and circle around and free up those developers so that they can get back to working on SignalR 3 once we get some of the more core aspects of ASP.NET 5 and DNX finished. So don't worry, SignalR 3 is absolutely coming, and it will be on top of ASP.NET 5 just like MVC 6. It's just that we've had to divert those developers to work on ASP.NET 5 directly at the moment. And then the tooling repo, we have a new tooling repo. So on GitHub/ASP.NET/tooling, you can now log issues to do with any of the Visual Studio tools to do with this new stack. So if you've been using our new project system, using the new templates, and you have some feedback where you think you found an issue, go and log that issue on the tooling repo so that you've got a nice transparent way of giving that feedback. Previously, there really wasn't a good place to log Visual Studio feedback with this stack. Like you could log it on Connect, but that's kind of disjointed from everything else on GitHub that we do. So now we have a tooling repo where you can log that stuff and interact with the tooling team, and ourselves looking at that. So yeah, so that's all good.
Is the intent to put tooling in there right now? It's being used primarily as just an issues location?
I don't have anything to report regarding actually putting code in that repo, like tooling code. I can tell you personally, I'd love to get to a place where all of our tooling was open source and people could build it themselves and we could have nightly builds and all that type of great stuff. I don't have a timeline for when that might happen, but one day in the future. Fowler's telling me to tell you all that the other thing you have to be aware of is that for all the packages that we're now building on our daily branches, basically, from the dev branch. You cannot use those packages with the tools that you have already, the KPM, the KRE, and K, because those target framework monikers changed from ASP.NET Core 50 and ASP.NET 50 to DNX 4.6 and DNX Core 50. The old tools don't know how to deal with those new packages. Okay? As we said before, because we've changed the name of things, we've kind of frozen people in time. So if you want to keep using the daily stuff, you have to move to the new tools, but that also means giving up VS until we drop a new version of VS out there.
Okay. So for those of us who want to live on the cutting edge, but we only have CTP6, what should we do? Wait? Do nothing?
If you want to live on the bleeding edge, but you still want to use Visual Studio, the newest you can do is everything up until last Friday.
Okay. So I'm going to stay on CTP6 and look forward to the RC at some point in the future then.
Yeah, whatever the next version is going to be. Yep.
Okay, cool. Shiny.
Lovely.
Galloway is AWOL, so we have no community stuff to report other than we like the community very much.
We love them, yes.
Cool. Seth, do you want to say hi?
Hello, my name is Seth. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is spending time with this guy to show you how this stuff actually works, because he did speak really fast and I was confused.
It's a community stand-up. We do things quick and stand-up.
Okay.
And Seth, you have a PhD in unsolvable numbers, as I recall.
I didn't even finish my candidacy because I couldn't solve it. That's how hard it was. But yeah, look forward to Channel 9 getting into his head so you can actually see this in a little bit more slower. Because if you want to be on the bleeding edge, I think we should show them how, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, the issue right now is that being on the bleeding edge hurts. It's called the bleeding edge for a reason. It cuts. And things are still churning so much right now that if we went to the effort of putting together 6 hours of videos, they'd probably just be out of date 2 weeks later. And so, unfortunately, the best bet right now, if you want to be on the bleeding edge, is hit up David Fowler in Jabber. He's there 24/7, it seems like. Hit us up on Twitter. Look at the repos, the GitHub repos, because they're kept up to date generally with information on how to use the latest stuff. But in terms of getting like more traditional videos and documentation, that's not going to happen until we've locked stuff down.
I don't like traditional videos anymore. I just want to come in and be like, hey, I'm going to look over your shoulder for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
How do you set this up?
Yeah.
So, Seth, I think people may be missing some context about who you are and why you're randomly in there next to Damien.
Well, me and Damien are really good friends. We go way back. I mean, we lived in Mexico early and sold chiclets on the streets, and then we worked our way up.
They were good days, man.
Oh, geez. Well, I actually work for Channel 9. I'm a technical evangelist, and my job is to make sure you know how to do stuff with Microsoft.
Okay, cool. So you're new.
I am new.
Very exciting. All right, cool. This is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Damien Edwards, please prepare the dramatic zoom out.
I am ready when you are, sir.
Go. That was beautiful. That was the best one yet.
Never gets old.